All right. So this is part 3 of the full set review for Modern Horizons 3. We are covering today all of the black and green archetypes, commons, and uncommons. So very quickly, the review system that we're using today is the Scuffle review system. So I grade everything on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'll give it a big average grade in the corner. That's your pack 1, pick 1, and that's your how high should you be thinking of this card for a baseline. So a 1 is a card you should never play, a 2 is a card you should try not to play, 3 is replaceable, 4 is solid, 5 is strong, 6 is a card that you will always play in a given color or deck. 7 is a card that pulls you into a given color or deck. 8 is a card that you should do some work to play, whether that's a splash or you're changing up how you are building your deck. 9 is a card that says when you have this, you are doing this now, whatever it is. And then a 10 is a card that you will always play. No exceptions. I also give everything a floor value and a ceiling value, which is the worst or best the card will be, and then the effort required to bridge the gap. So sometimes a card will be really strong in a specific deck or with specific other cards, and I will give an effort value based on how likely those things are to occur. So if you aren't guaranteed to have, if you open a pack, look at the cards, and then you're not guaranteed to have the card that goes with it, you might have a value that you need to consider something at. Conversely, if you really like playing with a card and I give it a ceiling of an 8, but a value of a 4, then maybe you're really good at getting the card up to an 8, or maybe you're willing to put the effort into getting that card up to an 8. And then sometimes you'll see a card that's like, I can do the thing. So maybe it's a lot of work, but then you find out that the thing you're doing just isn't worth it. So the best example I have of this is Slime Against Humanity and MKM. You look at that card and you think, well, what if I get 10 Slime Against Humanities? Aren't all my slimes 10/10s? And it's like, yes, but that's still not good enough. That card's still bad. So if the ceiling is really low, maybe don't put it in your deck. All right, so we're gonna start with black today. Oh, and one more thing, for the purposes of this review, I am streaming this live on Twitch, but I make this to post elsewhere. This is the only content I do that is like that. So I have some of the notifications off. If you have any questions, ask them. I'd love to hear from you, and I might be wrong about things, and we'll get that right answer together. But I will be only taking questions between each slide. All right, so up first, we have red black. We're doing black first. That's the color. So red black affinity is the build archetype. In general, you want to look at the red black affinity cards in terms of priority as removal, payoffs for having a lot of artifacts. You'll need those before you pick up the artifacts, and then cards that are reliant on having artifacts. So that is your pick order. And the reason that we want the cards in that order is that if you open a Cranial Ram, this is a very powerful card in the affinity deck. If you're not in the affinity deck, it's very weak. The cards that are flexible and fit into multiple decks are the removal spells. So your red removal and your black removal is flexible and will go into all of your red decks or black decks. So you need to pick those first. So I have Ram versus Enforcer here because Cranial Ram is pretty good on its own. You don't need a ton of artifacts for it to be good, but you need a few. You need to have artifacts in your deck. And then there's a Mirror Enforcer. It's a Frog Mirror Enforcer in red. You need a lot of artifacts for that card to be playable. Control is totally... Oops. Control... Dang it. I pressed the number, I guess. Control is solid and can come from a black-red deck, which is kind of interesting because the black-red artifacts deck is very aggressive. The black-red control deck has a lot of removal. They both start with removal spells, but you can kind of choose which lane you end up in as you go. And then, lastly, if you start in the artifacts deck and it's not really working, Jund works in it. Like, you can be a Jund mid-range deck that is red, green. Hey, King, how's it going? Okay. Ondu or Black-White Aristocrats is the Black-White archetype. They call it like modified sacrifice. And yes, you do care a little bit about modifying your creatures. There are cards that do more when creatures are modified. But you need to, in order, pick up your Aristocrats first. That's the cards that care about things dying. Because there's only 3 of them, and they're all uncommon, and you need them if you want to be the Aristocrats deck. Then you need your Sack Atlas, things that let you sacrifice creatures. Then you need your removal, and then you need your tokens. There are a lot of things that make tokens in the set. They do them, some better than others, but in general, you will have less trouble picking up the things that generate tokens than any other of the pieces that you need for your Black-White Aristocrats deck. While you're going, try and figure out the extent to which your creatures need to be modified. So like this Ondu Knotmaster, you're getting the most value out of it if you're throwing a line to 2 creatures, but you might not need to throw a line to 2 creatures. You might just play this as a 2/2 and then start making it huge. Some cards care about creatures being modified and some just don't. Counter rectangles, you might be able to get value out of extra artifacts or extra like just random pieces, bestow creatures especially, and that happens more and more at rare, but figure out which rectangles you can use and how much you get out of having a lot of them. And then how are you finishing the game? So you can finish the game with a lot of creatures by either making them all big, attacking with them all at once, or letting them all die at the right time. And leaning towards one or the other is going to make your deck stronger and more consistent. Up next, blue-black draw 3 control. You need removal first, then your bombs, then your card draw, and then your engine. And you can have different kinds of engines. You can build different kinds of engines. While you're drafting, try and figure out how much your graveyard matters and whether you care more about tempo or control. So a tempo deck is something like you'll have a lot of sneaky snackers, some bounce spells, some cheap removal, and you're drawing cards in order to play all the cards you draw and force through your attackers. Like this is a 2-mana 2/1 flyer. This is a pretty efficient attacker if you play it on turn 2. But you can also be hard control. There's some good late game finishers. There's some good ways to just drain your opponent out slowly once you have the game locked down. That requires some bombs a lot of the time and a lot more removal in general. And then lastly, you'll need to block in this. You will not always be able to kill everything. You'll not always be able to kill everything in a safe way. So try and figure out how you're going to block and set things up accordingly. You might need just some walls. You might need some ramp creatures that can also block. And you might be fine just throwing some death touch creatures in if you're able to reanimate them. But you want to know that as you're going. And Wizards of the Coast does build this as draw 3. There are only a few cards that actually care about drawing 3 in a turn. They're all reasonable, but it's much harder to pick up the cards that let you draw 3 than the cards that care about you drawing. Cursed Wombat. Alright, so green, black modified is the last one. So that we haven't talked about this on the other ones because this is the first time we've hit it. We have seen our green black cards because we're doing green and black today. So your pick order is a little bit more difficult for green black. On the flip side, the cards in green black that you want tend to be really obviously strong at a glance. Like this is a 2-mana 2/3. It adapts into a 5/6 or just 4 mana, but you don't need to adapt this for this to be a valuable and efficient creature for you. So what you need first are your growth creatures. And that's not necessarily this is a creature that grows. What I mean is creatures that grow something, and it can be the creatures that grow themselves, it can be the creatures that generate value over time, but you want the ones that do it by themselves first. Then you need to decide whether you need card advantage or engine pieces. So like Cursed Wombat is kind of an engine all on its own, but there's another creature, a 3-mana 3/3 adapt 1, and it says whenever it attacks, it's the slime, it's the other green black signpost common. Whenever it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target modified creature. That one just grows on its own, it grows over time. That is an engine. It eventually takes the game over, and if you have it on curve, your opponent has to keep blocking it. But you need either card advantage or good ways to have an engine. We're going to talk about a lot of the different engines you can assemble today as we go through the black and green cards. And then lastly, you need big creatures or an engine. So like, are you going to win the game by grinding out value, like by using the different Persian effects or creature generators to just outvalue your opponent, or are you going to like just be huge? Like you can just be big enough to attack through all of your opponent's creatures, including the Eldrazi. And then there is one more step, which is just removal. Removal is really good in green and black, and you do need it, but it's harder to find than your engine pieces or the right creatures at the right time. All right, on to the cards. Oh, I got this today. Hard to see. Modern Horizons 3 pre-release smug. I only got to play one pre-release event, and we did 2 at a giant. It was nice. One with my friend Scott. Hi Scott, if you're watching. All right. Up first, we have a Cursed Marauder. 2-mana 2/1 creature. So this is better. I'm actually bumping up. I gave this a rating before I got to play with it. And the thing about a Curse Marauder is we're gonna wait 90 seconds because there's an ad going. Sorry. In that case, we're gonna do a really quick check and then I'll Curse Marauder. Check green. So how's everybody doing today? It was a good day. I'm sorry, I know Sunday night is not the most convenient time for the set review, but I really need to work on my primer tomorrow. And the set releases Tuesday, so the only time I could do it. Yes, Ganj. This card's good though. It's a good card. Pretty happy. Like playing with it. There's just so many little loops. It's also much better than an Edict. Alright, so this is a Cursed Marauder. A Cursed Marauder is much better than an Edict, but it's non-token creature. It always hits a non-token creature. So on the floor, that's like a 3. Like you're hitting your opponent's worst non-token creature isn't bad. It's not amazing, but like it's passable. And you can build so that it's less of a hit for you. But this particular card is easier to recur. So there are so many different combos and loops and little ways to use the Accursed Marauder that it does end up being worth more than a card. So like in early access, I had a setup with the Idol that returns a spell creature to your hand at instant speed, but only on your turn. You can put this ability on the stack, pick it up, put it down again. It's great with the Victimize effects. It's great with all of the Afterlife creatures, token generators, and it makes a lot of your otherwise weak cards a lot better, and we'll see a lot of them today. But like, there's lots of 1-drops that you just need to get dead. There's even bigger creatures that you just need to get dead, and the Accursed Marauder really aids with that. So it is being on a creature makes this card good. You don't really even care about the stats on it. Like it could be an 0-1 and it would still functionally be pretty much the same. There's so many ways to pull additional value on it, and it kills a lot of creatures that are really difficult to kill otherwise. Whether it's because they have hexproof and monocolored, and often, like against the Eldrazi deck, your opponent will have only one real creature in play and lots of tokens, and you'll get to take that out. There are decks where it's really weak. There are some opponents who just have enough creatures that they don't care about that you don't want this card. But I've been really happy with it. So I bumped it up since I gave it my initial rating. Arcbound Condor. So this is one of the strong... I think this is the strongest affinity card? Yes, so if you're Affinity, you want this card. It triggered... Like, without this bottom line of text, a 4-mana 3/3 flying modular is almost good enough. But with this bottom line of text, you'll get to kill a bunch of stuff. Sometimes you'll just play this card and hit 2 Eldrazi spawns, and it's going to be really strong. It also combos in lots of ways with lots of other creatures. Like there's even like that Tameo card where you discard X card, put twice X clues into play. Works really well with the Condor. It's not free, so I gave that a floor of a 3. But you don't need to be full affinity. Like, this is best in a full affinity deck. But if you just have a few artifacts, card's still solid. Like, you'd play a 4-mana 3/3, ping a creature. Play a 4-mana 3/3, ping 2 creatures. I'm pretty happy to be playing this. Like, you want to have an artifact creature in play already. You want to have a lot of other artifacts still in your hand when you cast this. But you can go off with this card. Like, sometimes the nature of affinity means that you will get to play this spell and then play a bunch of other artifacts in the affinity deck. Like, you really do need a lot of other artifacts. So I gave it a floor of a 3 with a ceiling of an 8, and I'll pick it pretty high pack 1 because it is a reason to go into affinity. Like, I will have packs with an Arcbound Condor and a Cranial Ram, and I will take the Condor and hope that the Cranial Ram comes back around. Like, that is how you get into the affinity deck. This is one of the cards to make it happen. Our first black MDFC. Alright, so our first MDFC, that is Modal Phase Dual card, is Boggart Trawler. So, if this were just a 3-mana 3/1 that were a land, it would be fine. I'm going to go ahead and... I feel like this should be a 6, honestly, but we're going to leave it here for now. Exiling a player's graveyard is relevant. It's not crazy, but you're pretty happy with it. And there's not a lot of extra value for the trawler. Um, like I will play this if I am black every time, but I won't always take it over a removal spell. Which is generally how I've been rating the MDFCs. Like, if I will take it over a card that I will play in that deck, then it's going to have a 6 or a 7. If I will not be playing it over a removal spell, or if there's other cards I want to take over it, I give it a 5. But I'll always be happy to have this in my black deck. Yeah, it's Boggart. So, I think it's Bojuka Bog pre-Bojuka. So, like, it's a Boggart Bog, and then this Boggart Trawler is what makes it into Bojuka Bog. Like, maybe Bojuka Bog has a bunch of Boggart Trawlers in it, and that's why it's Bojuka Bog. It's pretty cool. Like, the front side is Bojuka Bog, the back side is just the swamp part. Yes, but you need that option. Like, it's not... I take MDFCs pretty high because I like being able to run 15 land decks. Like, I'll play a 15 land deck with 3 MDFCs every time. Or 4. But you want ones that are relevant bodies. And this is a relevant body. Alright. Breathe Your Last. Not a lot to say about it. Like, this is a 3 mana destroy target creature. You will usually gain less than 1 life. Like, there are so many colorless creatures in this set that this is just murder, and murder is a 5. Yes, you can hit a 2-color creature or a 3-color creature and gain 2 or 3 life. It's only rarely murder with upside though, Vokon, because double black is tougher in this set than murder has been in other sets. And there's about half the creatures have devoid. They don't have any colors. So, like, it's fine. I gave it a 5 for 5 ceiling of 5. It's always gonna play as solid but not amazing removal. Yeah, 3 mana is a lot in this set to kill something, but, like, that's just due to competition. It's really good. Removal is still removal. Removal with nothing else is what yeah, exactly. Removal with nothing else is a 5, and that's my usual. That's how I usually think about it. Buried Alive. So this card is not playable with commons or uncommons. This card has things that make it work, but they are all rares. So you can't take it if you don't have those rares. There are enough rares that you will play this some of the time, but you need the rares. Like, there are rares, so, like, there are rares that you can get with Buried Alive. There are cards that you can that benefit so much from playing a Buried Alive after they're in play. All rares. So don't take it unless you have them. I gave it a floor of a 1 and a ceiling of a 6, and even then, like, you don't even want it in those situations. So I'm gonna drop the ceiling to a 5. Alright. Up next, Consuming Corruption. So I came back to this one a few times. The thing about Consuming Corruption is, in this format, you actually do like, being able to kill an energy creature and gain 2 life for 2 mana is pretty good. If you can cast this spell, it's okay. 2 mana, deal 2 damage, gain 2 life is solid. 2 mana, the fact that it scales even if it's a little bit is great. If you can deal 3 damage, 4 damage, 5 damage, the card's great. If you're mono black, this is a 7, but that's hard. It's hard to be mono color in this set. But I mean, if you have 4 Consuming Corruptions, that's a good enough reason to be mono black. Yeah, this card is pretty good. 2 mana, deal 2, gain 2 is good in this format. So I gave it a floor of a 4. That's 2 mana, deal 2, gain 2. That ceiling of a 7 is assuming you can scale up at all. You have to build a little carefully when you are working on this, just because of how the how fetches tend to work in your deck. Alright, I think that's right. Sorry, I was just making sure the slides were centered correct. Alright, yeah, this is a cool card. It's solid removal. Alright, up next we've got Dreadmobile. I love this card, but that's because my favorite deck so far has been Black-White Aristocrats. It ends up playing really well. So a 3 mana 3/3 vehicle with Menace. It's not quite free to crew, but it's pretty cheap to crew. But you can't kill this with sorcery speed removal, which I really like about it. Like, it is immune to most of the things that could kill it before you care. So, like, red has a 2 mana deal 4. If your opponent is red and you think they have any of their 4 deal 4 damage spells, you just don't have to crew this until it's got 5 toughness. If your opponent is white then they can take out artifacts okay, but like a lot of the bite spells, a lot of the fight spells, a lot of the removal is sorcery speed. So being able to control when this is a creature, I consider it to be upside. Usually being a vehicle means that this is downside. That being said, you do need a way to crew it, and the way that the aristocrats decks play out tends to go in two directions. And one of those directions is with lots of 1/1 tokens that you get incidentally from cards. And one of those directions is lots of Eldrazi spawn. So it does work better in the traditional creatures build because the Eldrazi spawn can't crew the Dreadmobile. But you're very likely to have enough creatures to throw to this, and you're very likely to be able to just dodge removal with it. This is a high priority pick for Aristocrats deck, and it's a very powerful sack outlet for the decks that want it. So I gave it a 5, floor of 3, ceiling of 7, and it's going to be somewhere between that most of the time. Like, it is a 7 value pick when you have all the rest of your Aristocrats pieces, and you're missing the sack outlets, because there's not a lot of sack outlets. Up next, Dream Drinker Vampire. I think I'm coming down on this. Like, because the thing is, like, this card is fine in every black deck. But it's never amazing. It's never going to feel like the best card in your deck because 2 mana for a 2/1 lifelink is solid. It's good, reasonable. It keeps you alive. It gets you where you're going. And then you can adapt 1 to give it menace and be a 3/2 for 4. Like, right. Like exactly, Ranger. The fail case of Child of Night is not bad. But it's not like it's okay in the modified deck. It's okay in the black green adapt deck. But like if you don't want to actively put counters on it, it's going to be a 4, which is fine. The card's fine. There's no real way to punish an X1, which is Child of the Night was like so Child of the Night is a 2 mana 2/1 lifelink vampire without any of the rest of this text. And we've had it be really good in sets and had it be really bad in sets, and that's usually related to how much kills it. And now we're in an awkward situation where there's nothing that punishes you playing this card, but there are so many better things to do. So card's fine, but like you want to care about the counters. So I give it a 4. I think that those are the only 2 black cards whose ratings I wanted to change. Up next, Drossclaw. So Drossclaw is great if you are it's medium if you're an artifacts deck, and it's medium if you're a modified deck. But you'll play it in those decks because you need a certain amount of modified cards and you need a certain amount of artifacts. And there are things you'd rather have. There are better versions of this card, but it will do its job. So like in black white, there's the Mandible Kite, the 1 mana 1/1 living weapon. That card's going to be better than the Drossclaw. And in black green, you want more counters. And in black red, you want more, you just want better artifacts. But like, you will play every artifact you can get a lot of the time. And it's not the worst. So like, it's a 2 mana 1/1 that they lose 1 life. So it does attack for 2. And if you're trying to burn your opponent out or close out those last few points of damage, moving this around is a reasonable way to do it. But it's never something you're going to be happy to be using. So I gave it a 3, floor of 2, ceiling of 5. I don't know where my notes thing went, and I don't know why it went away, and I'm not going to worry about it. All right, Etched Slith. All right, so this card does not get in as easily as you might think. Being a 2 mana 1 with menace is pretty cool. Like, it grows every attack. That first hit is great, but enough of the creatures in this format come in with an extra body that you're going to have to spend real spells to get this through. So, like, you may have played with this over the weekend. If you played it and your opponent casts the 3 mana 3/3, that makes an Eldrazi spawn. They're willing to give up the Eldrazi spawn to kill your Etched Slith. And then if you kill that 3/3, then they make another Eldrazi spawn. Like, it is not hard to get the second creature to block this, which means that you'll need to use the removal spell in order to punch through with this. However, there are some cool combos with this card. So, like, if you can get it with, like, it removes a counter from another target, permanent or opponent. So, like, if I have, what's the first one? All right, Ajani Fells the Godsire. So I get to exile a creature and opponent controls the power 3 or greater. That's chapter 1. Then attack with my Etched Slith, because I just cleared a blocker. I get to remove the counter from Ajani Fells the Godsire, and then next turn, I get to exile a creature and opponent controls the power 3 or greater again. So, it is bad as an attacker, but very good as a combo or engine piece. So this is a cool example of what I mean when I'm saying what kind of engines are you doing. Like maybe you're good at maybe you're pulling your counters off your creatures so you can adapt again. Maybe you're pulling -1/-1 counters off your multicolor persist creature. It is not good enough by itself. You need removal and you need value that you generate by pulling counters off of stuff. And that is good. And you're not going to be pulling counters off of your opponent's things too often, but it happens. Aw, thank you so much, Foxy. It's really good to see you, and you're very sweet. I was going to message you in just a bit, actually. Alright, up next we have Ethereum Terramander. This is getting a revisit from me, because not only being able to block creatures with flying is a pretty big drawback, but it's not... It's an affinity creature that you don't have to stockpile. Like, I think it's only any good in affinity. I think I need to drop the ceiling on this, but it's really good in affinity. Like this is, if you can get this to be black for a 5/5, that's very good. If you can get it to be 4 mana for a 5/5, that's also very good. It can't block. All right, I'm dropping both of these numbers because it's really only good in affinity, but it's very good in affinity. And because you get to play it for your other affinity cards, you don't have to stockpile it. And a lot of the affinity cards, it's like, well, I'm going to play a worse card this turn so that I can have a more efficient turn next turn. Yes. Not being able to block hurts. And I didn't think of that really. Like I was so zoomed in on, like, you really want your cheap flyers in black red. Like, it's a great cheap flyer for the Cranial Ram. It suits up really well. And you don't need to be an affinity deck. Like, if you have 3 artifacts in play, then this is 4 to adapt. That's fine. But you need 3 other artifacts besides this. And that's not free. So I gave it a medium effort 4, and I just revised this to a 4 because if this could block, I think it would be a much higher rating. Because you'd be more comfortable playing it outside of affinity. Alright. Up next, Eviscerator's Insight. You have to want to combo with this. So this is a way you can... like, this is a card that gets you to the 3rd card drawn and does it again. You can loot it and it'll get you to the 3rd card drawn. And it combos with lots of little things like the Sneaky Snacker. Being able to... you stack the Sneaky Snacker as part of the cost, and it comes back right away. And that's a great combo. Like, it's a really good combo at common, but you want a bunch of copies of both of those. Like, I'll play 3 Eviscerators inside if I have 3 Sneaky Snackers, and vice versa. But it's not free to feed the Eviscerators Insight, and you have... so I don't take it... I won't be taking it very highly. I need to already have the things that it works with before I take it. But if I see a bunch of these late, I'll be pretty happy to snap them up and play them. I'll just be picking it as at a 3 most of the time. Ooh, now this is an MDFC. This is one of the best ones. It's almost always going to play at that ceiling of a 7, but like, you will either need a land or need to kill something for 4 mana in an instance. Always. You will always need one of these 2 modes. You will either need Fell the Profane or you will need Fellmire. So I gave it a rating of a 7 with a ceiling of a 7. It's almost always going to play at that ceiling of a 7 due to the low effort required. Yeah, I think this is the best MDFC in the set. It's really close. I haven't seen all the rare ones, if there are any. All right. What's up, Alex? Oh, hi, Alex. We are doing the set review today, so I'll be answering questions between slides. I do consider myself to be bisexual. So, sort of. But I am an ally for sure. And if you have any other questions, let me know. I don't know what the Brewmaster Challenge for. Is it for $30 vintage? We can take a look at a little later, but we're going to finish our set review right now. Alright. Up next, we've got Fetid Gargantua. So a 5 mana 4/5 is kind of weak. An 8 mana 6/6 that draws 2 cards is also kind of weak, but fine. However, you can do some crazy combos with this. I gave it a floor of a 4, and it's usually going to play near that floor of a 4. A 5 mana 4/4 is not, like, devastatingly bad. It's fine. It could be worse, and your opponent, like, it matters a little less at 5 mana that is understated, because as long as you untap with it, you'll get to adapt 2, and it'll be a 6/6. 2 life isn't nothing. But so it's adapt 2, and whenever counters are placed on it, you draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. There are other ways to reset this, and there are other ways to put counters on it. This has lots of little combos that make it really strong, and if you have those, pick it a little higher. It has kind of diminishing returns. You can only play so many of these in your deck, but it's really good in the right deck. I just won't be taking it that high. I might raise the ceiling, but I'm fine with it for now. Gravedigg. I don't want to drop it a little bit. So like the fail case of being a 2-mana 2/2 is nice. And there are cards that care about tokens that you want to use. You will usually be pretty happy to pay 4 mana and pick a creature up, but you have to have creatures you want to pick up. So I'd rather play this in an Aristocrats deck where I'm trying to assemble lots of little pieces. There are just enough little pieces in the set that you want together that your opponent's going to be trying to disrupt, that I'm usually going to be happy to play the first copy of this card, but I don't want that many, and I need to have things worth picking up. So yeah, it gave it a 4. It's a fine card. I'll usually play that first copy at a 5, and then the second copy will be a 3. But I like the card. It's also brilliant because it's 2 mana. Gravedigger was a 4 mana 2/2 zombie with, when it comes to play, return target creature from graveyard to hand. So if you entwine this, it's both. It is a Gravedigger, but you can play either half of the Gravedigger. I really like it. Hey McGabs, how's it going? Ooh, Saruman's a good one. It's a cool commander. All right, up next we've got Grim Servant. Oh, this is correct. Let's check all these slides. But this effort value is high. I have to put this onto the spreadsheet later. I think the ceiling is still a 4. So the story of Grim Servant is a 4 mana 3/2 with menace. If you didn't lose 3 life, I'd definitely play this card because you always have devotion to 1. Even if they kill this, you have devotion to 0. So you get to search up a land, even if you have no devotion to black because they kill this in response. You have to have 1 mana rares that make your deck function well for this card to be good, or a lot of life gain. And even then, I think I need to spread out the floor and the ceiling. But like, the card just doesn't do that much. 3 life is too high a cost for a tutor in this set when all your cards need to be good anyway. If you have a good mix of removal and combo pieces and fun things to do, then it gets a lot more reasonable. But it's still 3 life on a 4 mana 3 power creature with 2 toughness. It's just not going to be good enough most of the time. Thank you, Drewby. Today, here's a story haiku. I got this mug playing Two-Headed Giant. Drewby was there too. And here, I'll open this pack for you. I think that counts. Good game today, Drewby. We're just about to... Alright, we have this card. This is a foil forest. I'm looking at the camera. Okay, so this is the 2 mana 2/1. Whenever you draw your second card in a turn, you make an Eldrazi spawn, but it's a 2/1 flyer on its own, so I really like it. Then Light Pods. This is a cool card that we haven't looked at yet. It's enchantment spells you cast have affinity for auras, which is cool. I like that. They're putting in more affinities. Whenever you cast an aura spell that targets a modified permanent you control, draw a card. Ooh, we'll review this one today. Earlier. We'll review this one today. The Raptor is cool. It does have to be cast, but it's still like a 2/1 first strike. This card makes double clues. Land, Brushwag. We'll talk about this today. This is a cool persist card. Earlier, I'm sorry. This is the Goblin that shoots for 4. This card's been... I got to play Aether Revolt today and play a couple of these. Alright, up next we have Tommy of Jealous Thirst. Alright, so this is usually going to play near that floor of a 4, which is a 3 mana 1/3 that activates once or twice in a game. If you have a dedicated draw 3 deck, this card's pretty good because it's not a terrible wall. It trades up a lot. They'll usually kill another kill a creature because a 3 mana 1/3 Death Touch is not great, but there's a lot of ways to grow your creatures in this format. And a 2/5 with 2/4 or 3/5 with Death Touch is a lot better. This card needs the draw 3s, and it needs to be a more controlling variant of the draw 3 deck. And then it's going to play close to that ceiling of a 6. But most of the time, it's just going to be a 3 mana 1/3 that trade. If you reading all the cards is the only surefire way to avoid drawing every game. This set is hard, and a lot of players drew today. All right, up next, Lethal Throwdown. It's usually going to play to that ceiling of a 6. I gave it a 6. Sacrificing a creature to destroy a creature is good. Sacrificing a creature to destroy a creature and draw a card is great. And there are lots of cheap modified creatures. So like if you have 3 Lethal Throwdowns, this Drossclaw gets a lot better because you can feed them to the Lethal Throwdown. Lethal Throwdown is a solid piece of removal that I'll be taking pretty high in my black decks. It's also often in this set, sacrificing creature can be an upside. I want to mug it, my pre-release. I went 3-1 today. All right, then we have Marionette Apprentice. If you want to be the Aristocrats deck, you should take this over just about everything else. The card is very powerful. It's 2 mana for a 1/2 and a 1/1. 2 bodies on 1 card is powerful in this format. 2 bodies on 1 card that is also your Aristocrats finisher is great. It'll play near that. So the only deck that doesn't want this is a hard control deck, and even then, it's still 2 blockers, and it's pretty good. Right. So Lazotep Reaver was a 2 mana 1/2 that amassed zombies one, and that card was fantastic. But yes, this card is really good. It's 2 bodies for 2/3 worth of power, and it is your Aristocrat, and it triggers on creatures and artifacts. The only reason it's not a well, maybe it should be a 7. I almost always take this. Like, there's not a lot I'll take over the Apprentice. No, because if you're not an Aristocrats deck, there are a lot of cards you take over. But like, I will take it early to be an Aristocrats deck. That's a really good question, Numbskull. All right, what does Aristocrats mean? Is what Numbskull just asked. Let's do it this way. Aristocrat. So, once upon a time, Aristocrats was a deck that sacrificed creatures with Blood Artists out, things that whenever a creature dies do a thing. And it was just coincidentally at the time, the 2 creatures that sacrificed creatures were both called Aristocrats. Cartel Aristocrat, Falkenrath Aristocrat. So this is it's not a new strategy. The strategy has existed for years. It was a strategy when Blood Artist was printed. Which, for those of you who don't know, whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So when they did, the deck became most popular in Standard when these 2 were the sacrifice outfits. Sacrifice another creature, gain protection for the color of your choice. Sacrifice another creature, gains indestructible. So the name stuck. People started calling it Aristocrats. It was Mardu Aristocrats was the standard deck. And now, when you feed a bunch of creatures for the purposes, like when you're trying to get a bunch of creatures to die because you want your opponent to lose a life, for each creature that dies, they call it Aristocrats. So between Apprentice and Dreadmobile, you can get a pretty strong Aristocrats deck together in this set at Uncommon. We'll talk about that a lot. That's kind of what Black and White is. So the other Wizards of the Coast calls it White-Black Sacrifice Modified Creatures. And that's too long. So we call it Aristocrats. Yep. Alright, up next we've got Mindless Conscription. You're welcome. So this card is a 3 mana, 3/3 modified creature with no other help. Being a token is something of a liability. It's not a token you can populate. It doesn't make multiple bodies. So that's that floor of a 4. If you have just a few ways to draw 3 cards in your deck, that's all it takes for this to be quite a strong card. The more you have, the better it is. It's best in blue-black, but it has a place in white-black, and you can... I don't think there's any other mass cards in this set. So Mass Zombies 3 is, if you don't have an army, you make an army, a 0/0 army, and put 3 counters on it. If you do have an army, you have to grow that army. But like, it's not a problem if you make your 3/3 into a 6/6 instead of making another 3/3. And if you're a deck that wants to sacrifice your creatures, you can sacrifice this and then draw the 3rd card and make a 3/3. But similar to Sneaky Snacker, if I have a Eviscerator's Insight, I can sacrifice my 3/3 zombie, draw 2 cards, make a 3/3 zombie. So there's lots of, it's okay on its own, and there's lots of cards that make it a little stronger. So I gave it a 4 with a ceiling of 7, and I gave it a 5 with a floor of 4 and a ceiling of 7. And you need other cards to get it up to that ceiling of 7, but you can get those cards. Thank you, March. Alright, up next, Nadir's Nightblade. So this card is incredibly powerful in the Aristocrats deck, and much weaker everywhere else. So compared to the Marionette Apprentice, this card is pure Aristocrats. It doesn't go in other decks. You really only want it in black-white, where you really want it. You really want this card in black-white. And then there's other decks you can build with it. Like, you can get a green-black Eldrazi Spawn deck together. You make a ton of Eldrazi Spawn and then eat them all at once, because they do sacrifice themselves. It is not just creature tokens either. So it works with treasures, and it works with, I think treasures is the only thing that matters that it works with, but there's clues and treasures in this set. So all of those things making your opponent lose life is nice. And the life gain is very relevant. Like, you will have games where your opponent just can't get through the Eldrazi Spawn you're making every turn and then sacrificing to gain life. It's very strong. Up next is Quest for the Necropolis. So this card is all, like, card's very strong in Aristocrats, weak everywhere else. I should have mentioned. All right, Quest for the Necropolis. So this card has a lot of text, but it basically reads 6 mana. It's 7 mana, 6 plus black. And then landfall reduces the cost. So on average, like, let's say if you play this on turn 1 and then have a land on turn 2 and a land on turn 3, and it's a fetch land on turn 3, so you get to fetch another land. Then on turn 4, you can pay a black to sacrifice this. That is a reasonable reanimation spell, which means that it is good in a deck where you want to reanimate things. If you get to turn 7 and you don't have the quest yet, maybe you draw it like really late in the game, then you might be okay paying 7 mana to return a creature from your graveyard to play. But it's not good, it's fine. So, like, the card will always be fine in a black deck. It gets better if you build around it, and you want to be a reanimation deck. But this is not the reanimation spell that pulls you into the reanimation deck. If you are already a reanimation deck, because you have the rare creatures and you have the victimize, which we'll talk about in a few cards, then you can start picking these up, and they'll be reasonable reanimation spell. But it's not you don't pick these up in order to get into the reanimation deck. It ends up being this is an average 4 mana return target creature from your graveyard to play, which is playable but not strong. There are ways to hit out graveyards too, so it's usually gonna be fine. Up next, Refurbished Familiar. Compared to the other affinity cards, this one it's not the end of the world if you had to pay 4 mana for it. It's not good, but you're happy to just pay 2 or 3 mana for this. If this is 2 mana for a 2/1, each opponent discards for a 2/1 flying. Like, if this is a 2/1 flying Ravenous Rats, you're happy. If this is a 1 mana 2/1 flyer, you're very happy. But you need this to be... I'm dropping the difficulty on this. I'm happy with all my ratings, but we're dropping the difficulty and raising the floor. Because, like, even if your opponent doesn't have cards in hand, drawing a card is good on your 2 mana 2/1. But you need artifacts. You don't need to be affinity. You just need a certain number of artifacts. You want to be paying 2 mana for this. Even 3 mana is fine. Like, if you pay 3 mana for this, it's okay. And it is itself an artifact. It's best in the affinity deck, but it's always fine. Yeah, exactly. It's guaranteed card advantage on a 2/1 flyer. You want this to be 1 or 2 mana, but if you pay 3 or 4, it's not the end of the world. That's a force. Alright, up next, Retrofitted Transmigrant. You have to have cards that make this work, but every color pair has cards that make this work. Not every... Like, this isn't a strictly... It's black-white card or blue-black card. Blue-black has a lot of looting. You're happy to pitch this. Black-white has a lot of sacrifice. You're happy to sacrifice this. Black-green cares about the counters. You're happy to chump block with it, return it to play as a modified creature. And black-red is affinity, so you want this to be an artifact card. So it has a place in every archetype and in every color pair. It has diminishing returns in every color pair. You are always going to be limited on the number of these that you can fit. But a recurring 3/3 is pretty good in the long term. Good night, King. Thanks for coming by. Yeah, card's always fine. Scurrilous Sentry. So if this were always a 3/4, it would be okay. But like the advantage to conniving is that you want to be able to pitch your lands some of the time. And if you pitch a non-land card on Scurrylit Sentry, then it's bad because it's a 2/3 with Menace. And the difference between a 2/3 and a 3/4 in Menace is huge on turn 4. It's so likely that your opponent either has 2/2/2s available to block. Like, so the deck types either put out 2/2/2s to block your Menace creature, and you need to be able to kill both of them or take out a 2/2 to get card advantage. Or they have a 6/5 that made some Eldrazi spawn, and then they get to block with an Eldrazi spawn and a huge creature. And you would, in a normal format, you're often okay just trading with one creature with your Menace creature because it gums up the board, but that's not the case here. You're not okay trading with your opponent's Eldrazi spawn. So, in the right deck, being able to connive every attack is pretty good, but you have to build around it. However, it's really good with retrofitted Transmogrant. So like, if you have other cards, you can make it work. I like how good the bad commons in this set play together really well. Like, this card and this card and this card, these are all good in a package. So if black's not really working, if you are having, like, if you pivot to black late, you can get some nice synergies at your commons. But this isn't a card that I want to play early, and it's not a card I want to take early, and it's not a card I want to play too often. But, you know, there are good places for conniving. There are decks that actively want to discard cards. Yeah, I'm loving the common combos. All right, up next, Creation of Avacyn. This card does not have a place. Like, you search up a creature, you lose that much life, you cast that creature. It's like Animate Dead from your library, but it takes 3 turns. Your opponent gets to know what's coming, and you don't have good targets. There aren't good things to get in this set. If there was something like comes into play, give everything -2/-2, then it might be okay. Or something, deal 4, gain 4. If you have like a Flage, the red-white creature that Lightning Helix is, the god, then it might be okay. But even so, I'm not happy. The one situation where this is good is if you can make Chapter 2 happen before Chapter 1. What that means is you cast the Creation of Avacyn, put the first ability on the stack, search library for a card, exile face down, then proliferate to Chapter 2 with the first ability on the stack. You won't lose that life, and you get the creature a turn early. That's way too much work for how weak this card is otherwise. If you have a 2 or 3 card combo of creatures, or just in general, then you can still play this, but like, this is a really weak tutor. I think they intentionally made all of the tutors incredibly weak in this. Like, Grim Servant, that's a huge cost to go get a card. Yeah, it's weak and don't play it. If you find a way to play it, tell me, but don't play it. Victimize, best black card? Best black card. No, I tied it with Fel the Profane. Fel the Profane and Victimize are my highest rated black cards. You don't have to use this as a reanimation spell for it to be good. You don't have to pay 3 mana and sack an Eldrazi spawn to pick up 2 giant creatures. Like, it's going to feel like you're cheating when you pick up 2 3-mana creatures. It's going to feel like you're cheating when you pick up a 2-mana and a 3-mana creature with Victimize. In fact, so many of the giant creatures in this set have terrible enter the battlefield effects, or don't have any enter the battlefield effects, or you have to, or they're cast triggers, like when you cast it. But I watched somebody Victimize and return 2 Marionette Apprentices to play and make 2 1/1s, and I'm like, this game's over. You return 2 2-drops, now you win the game. Victimize is incredibly strong. Yeah, and March, you don't. So back to this really quick. You don't even cast the Eldrazi. You put it into play. So you don't get your cast triggers on your 12-mana Eldrazi. Like, yeah, it feels like they intentionally made this very weak. To the point where there's probably, I feel like there's got to be a rare that combos with it, because I haven't seen them all yet. But yeah, we'll see. Victimize, best black uncommon. I don't think it's close. Wither and Bloom. So I came up a lot on this card. 2 mana, give a creature -2/-3 is good. It's very good in this set. It hits most things. Being instant speed is nice. Being only 2 mana is nice. This bottom part, exile Wither and Bloom from your graveyard, put a +1/+1 count on target creature you control, is often just worth a whole card. Like, sometimes it just gives you a combat you didn't have, but sometimes you get to put your counter on a Fetid Gargantua and draw 2 cards. Like, for 2 mana and 2 life. Sometimes you get to put the counter on your Arcbound Condor, and it gets to modular onto another creature. There's a lot you can do with it, and it's efficient removal at its fail case. And even if it doesn't, like, a lot of the Eldrazi, the way the math works out is, no, this doesn't kill your opponent's 7/7 or 6/8, but it does bring it in line with your creatures. So it lets you win combats against the larger creatures. It's a good card. Finally, Wurmcoil Larva. It's very powerful. This is a really good card. This is very likely to trade with a creature, gain 3 life, and then generate 2 artifacts. It's great in the Aristocrats deck because you sack it and it makes 2 bodies. You do want a way to sack it because you don't want your opponent to exile it. And while there's very few ways to exile creatures, there's a lot of ways to exile artifact creatures. So yeah, 3 bodies for 1 card with relevant abilities, relevant typing. Like a 1/2 with Death Touch is great. And the card is very good. It's just not aggressive, so it doesn't have synergies in some decks, but it's still a good card. So like in the black-green deck, this is a 5 because it's just good. And in the blue-black deck, this is a 5 because it's just good. But in black-red, where it's an artifact that makes 2 artifacts, or in black-white, where it's a creature that makes 2 creatures, it's a 7. Yeah, just very strong. You always play this in your black deck, but your pick order for it changes slightly based on what your black deck is doing. Whew. That's gonna be it for the black card. Really good, Rot. We just finished black and we're just about to jump over to green, and I'm just gonna get some water really quick while we're between colors. So we're gonna do green in 1 sec. I'll pull this up and I'll be right back. We're gonna run the ad 90 seconds and then we'll do green. Yeah, sorry, Domino. There's a lot of cards to get through, and I want to get through all of them. Sorry, Reality Rot. We did colorless on 4 days ago. But I'll have all these up on YouTube tomorrow. I got to win with this in Two-Headed Giant today. I didn't know you could hear me at all through the ad. Oh, neat. Yeah, I'm sorry, Reality Rot. We did the colorless cards yesterday. Or no, 4 days ago. Yeah, these are all the colorless cards. Alright, ads over. We're going to go ahead and get into this. Alright, so, green. Green in this set has bigger creatures than everybody else and more to do with their creatures in the late game. So, blue-green is Eldrazi Ramp. In order, you need to pick up your interaction first, then your ramp, then the big creatures. The big creatures are, like, it's the big colorless ones, but we'll go through a lot of the green ones. And then you get your small creatures last, because they're a little bit more replaceable, and you'll get to see that as we go. Ramp is one of the harder things to find. Eldrazi spawns count, but you have to figure out whether you're going to be a deck where you need a lot of mana that you get to keep spending it, or whether you just need to feed all the spawn into a big Eldrazi once. Like if you get an Emrakul, you might only need to ramp one time, but if you're using like Snapping Voidclaws in order to get mana, sacrificing Eldrazi spawn to draw cards is weak. You don't want to do that. So figure out how you're using your mana and then pick your cards in this order. So interaction / removal, ramp, big creatures, small creatures. While you're drafting, trying to figure out what your top end is. It doesn't necessarily have to be Eldrazi. We're going to look at some of the options. There are things other than Eldrazi that your top end can be. And then you need to figure out how you're pulling value from your ramp. Like how are you turning your mana into either a way to win the game or new cards. And then figure out if you need to draw cards. Not every Eldrazi deck needs to draw cards, but you have access to some pretty cool card draw. You might be a ramp deck that just plays your draw 3s and then lots of efficient creatures, or you might be a ramp deck that plays one giant creature and then gets there. Ooh, well, we will look at that in a bit, Numbskull. Totally fair, Reality Rod. All right, so green black modified. So we did just talk about this, but we're gonna do it again. So your pick order goes growth creatures. That's not necessarily creatures that grow, but creatures that provide more value over time. So Cursed Wombat or the Ooze are good examples. The giant Gargantua that drew 2 cards. Then your card advantage or your engine. You would rather have an engine assembled, but some of them are too many pieces or too fragile. Like you need a way to generate card advantage. And an engine is a good way to do that, but they're also like just creatures that do that or that draw cards. Then you need your big creatures or engine pieces. Whatever you decide, whatever you are going. So like, we looked at Chthonian Nightmare a little bit yesterday. That is a really good way to, like, that's a good example of a smaller engine that works by itself. And then your removal. You need ways to kill things. You can pick that at a lower priority because the removal available in green and black is really strong in green and black. The green removal spells are better in the green-black deck than in a lot of other places. While you're playing, try and figure out if you're winning with value or size. Are you just having giant creatures that punch through, or are you accruing value with an engine? And then figure out how much recursion you want and need. Green and black are both good at picking the cards up, but you don't always necessarily want to pick your cards up. Red-green Eldrazi Scions. So this archetype is ramp is very similar to blue-green. You will often end up splashing blue and vice versa compared to the blue-green version of Eldrazi. The red-green version of Eldrazi makes more Scions and has less like consistent ramp. There's fewer things that put a land into play or that let you play an additional land drop, and there's fewer creatures that tap for mana. But the creatures you get are better. You are also pretty good at splashing. So and then your Scions themselves, you're good at turning your Scions into real threats. There's a green creature that gives them evolve. There's a red-green creature that puts counters on them. So you can decide whether you want to use your Scions for mana or to attack, because you do end up generating a lot of Scions. They do have the best creatures out of any color pair. You need to pick your removal first. You can honestly do like half your removal, then the rest of your cards, then the other half. Then you need your good creatures, things like Writhing Chrysalis or your ramp creatures, then your finishers, and then your other creatures. Though the ramp can be a little bit different in red-green compared to blue-green. In blue-green, you tend to need green and blue mana a lot more. Like you need more colored mana. And then in red-green, you tend to need a little bit less. So like today I had a red-green Eldrazi deck with 8 wastes. 8 fetches, but yeah. Try to find a way to use your Scions, know how you're using them as you build your deck, and if you aren't using them, either as attackers or to ramp, then take them out. And then finally, green-white modified. Did I leave this slide in black? No. Alright, I finished it. Alright, great. So you need your preferred modifications. You can build green-white modified to care more about ++1 counters, or you can build it to care more about enchantments, or you can build it to care more about artifacts. Figure out which one you want the most based on the cards that pulled you into it, like this Golden Tail Trainer. If this is how you got into a green-white modified deck, then you want auras. You prioritize auras. Then you need your evasion. Then you need your payoffs for being modified, reasons to be modified, and you do need those payoffs because so many cards will put you at a disadvantage if your opponent kills them. Like, you have to have a deck that is okay with paying 5 mana to put an aura on a creature and then letting your opponent kill that creature because they're gonna have to. And then your removal last. Try and figure out if you really need to modify your creatures. Try and figure out if you need to spread the modified around. The best, so when we did white, there's a trainer, a unicorn, this one. So Nyxborn Unicorn. You can pay 4 to bestow this onto a creature. The creature that it is enchanting is modified. And then you also get to mentor another creature, which means that you have 2 modified creatures. So you can figure out how do you need to just make your Golden Tail Trainer really big that it pumps all your modified creatures, or do you need to spread your modified effects around? All right. Up first, our first card is a Nord Altasaur. So, it's a little odd in this format. You are not likely going to pay a 7 mana to hit a 6-drop or a 5-drop. But you're okay playing this card as long as your deck doesn't have misses. So if your deck doesn't have any misses, which is not hard to do, like, you can't have a bunch of counter spells for it. Because it is Cascade, you have to cast the spell. So if it's a combat trick or a counter spell, this card gets a lot worse. But a 7 mana 6/5, with Cascade, you have to think about where you're okay with your miss. So if it's a 7 mana 6/5 and I hit a 2/2, that's okay. That's a 7 mana 8/7. It's not great, but like a 7 mana 8/7 with some upside is nice. There are a few good ways to pick it up, and it's a safer top end. Yes, you don't want to miss on this card. You don't want to have paid 7 mana for a 6/5 in this form. You're okay paying 7 mana for a 6/5 that makes a 3/3. In this format, so many decks have a specific type of top end that they want. Green-black doesn't really want Eldrazi at the top. Green-blue really does. Red-green wants a lot of Scions. So the reason the Altasaur has such a high rating, I gave it a 6 with a ceiling of a 6, is that all of the different kinds of ramp deck are happy to top their curve with this card. It's always going to be good in decks that go late or have a top end. Like, there aren't that many better 7-drops, which is kind of a surprise. And 7's a lot. Like, you don't want too many copies of this card, but you're okay playing the first one almost every time. All right. Up next, Basking Brood Scale. Really good example of how strong the 2s are in this set. It's a 2 mana 2/2. You can pay 2 to make it a 3/3. That's pretty good, and it comes with an 0/1. If this is 4 mana for a 3/3 that makes an 0/1, that's pretty good. Like, in general, in other sets that would be great. In this set, it just competes with some crazy things at 3 and 4. But it's a good card. Like, it's best when you care about the Eldrazi spawns. That's going to be a 5 in the red, green, or green, blue. Otherwise, it's usually going to be a 4. But it's not a 4 you're upset about playing. I should probably raise it. But there are just so many good things to do at 2. There are so many good 2-drops in green, or 2 mana things to do in green, that all of them end up getting a slightly lower rating. You just don't need to prioritize them that high. Bridgeworks Battle, just a really good MDFC. Like, 3 mana +2/+2 and fight, that's great. You see me, I splashed Savage Smashes in OTJ as my only green cards for $1,000 in that Arena Open. And in this set, the Savage Smash is a land on the back. Both the modes are really good. Like, these are both modes that I'm going to be really happy to play in this format, even at sorcery speed. That floor of a 5 is if you just don't have a ton of creatures to make this work. If you only have a few smaller creatures to make this work, it's still a 5 because it's still a land and a removal spell. But it's usually going to play close to that ceiling of 7. I did give this the same rating as the black one. That's 4 mana destroy a creature. But the floor is a little bit lower. Collective Resistance. I had to revisit this one a few times, and I'm still going to give it a revisit. But the thing is, okay, 2 mana for any one of these modes is pretty bad. But 2 mana for any 2 of these, 3 mana for any 2 of these modes is great. If you get to save a creature and win a combat, destroy an artifact, that's really good. Even 3 mana destroy target artifact and destroy target enchantment is really good. Every single deck that you will play against has targets. So either your opponent is going to have removal that indestructible is good against, artifacts or enchantments. You do need to have creatures that you want to protect to play this card. But it isn't hard to have creatures you want to protect. Hopefully, your deck has some number of creatures that you want to protect. It's a little expensive, but it's not hard. Like, your fail case of holding this up, like, compared to other combat tricks, you only want this card when it can kill an artifact or enchantment, and if you don't get to fire it to protect a creature and kill an artifact, it's still fine to just kill the artifact. So it's low. You have the risk of being card advantage neutral, but a very low risk of being tempo negative as a result of this card. Yeah, it looked like everyone has either a removal spell or an artifact or an enchantment when you need to play this card. So I did I upticked it a little, but I'm keeping the revisit grade. Yes, a really good point, D-Take. Escalate being green. So I want to talk about this. So Escalate in the past we've had it as colorless mana and we've had it as green mana. Green is a real cost. It's not free. If this were 1 mana and the Escalate were 1, I'd probably have this at a 7. There are targets for this card. If you are best of 3, you should take it even higher, because if you get to 3-4 on your opponent with this, that's a 1 game. Like, if you get to kill an artifact and an enchantment and win a combat, like, you're winning the game. And there's a lot of situations where this is a very good combat trick, where you get to attack. Like, today I attacked a menace creature into my opponent's 4/4 and 2/2, and then another 4/4 into their 4/4, and I got to indestructible kill an artifact to make it a 4/4, kill my opponent's green path that make the green card that lets your tokens tap for mana or Eldrazi tap for mana. I'm like, oh, that was a 4/1. Pretty neat. Pretty cool card. Yeah, it's you have to put some work in to set up the situations you want, but it's worth it. Colossal Dreadmask. Okay, so we talked about red day before yesterday, and you kept hearing me say, look, your red-green deck needs ways to give your giant creatures trample to actually end the game. Otherwise, your opponent will chump block forever. Our cards are very good at chump blocking in this format. This is one of the best ways to avoid that. This is a 6 mana 6/6 with trample. Your opponent will almost always kill the germ because they have to, and then this just stays. It just stays in play, and you put it on the next creature you need to. Like, this makes so many creatures so scary at a high cost, but low risk. Like, a 6 mana 6/6 with trample is almost good enough in this set. It's not, but it's almost there, but then you can throw it around later. If your opponent kills the artifact, that's annoying, and that's a lot weaker, but usually your opponent's going to have to just deal with each creature you put it on, and it turns every creature you put it on into a threat. And compared to red yesterday, like, this is the specific card I was thinking about when we were looking at the red cards, because the red card has, like, Meteoric Mace. So, like, just comparing these two, this is 6 mana for a random creature. This is 6 mana for a 6/6. And it's only 1 more mana to equip, but it gives an extra +2/+4 stats. I'm sorry, +2/+6 in stats. So yeah, this is a good card for green, and this is a good finisher. We have a list of cards that grant trample and act as finishers in red and green, and in green and blue, and you need probably 2 of them in your deck. And this is one of those cards. It satisfies that requirement. You can't have too many, but I will play the first copy usually and the second copy often. Disciple of Freyalise. Okay, compared to the other MDFCs we've looked at just today, this one is a lot less flexible. You have to have triple green, you have to have good things to sacrifice, and if you're way behind and you top deck this, then this is just a 6 mana 3/3. With all of the MDFCs, you need to create the situation, like, they're all good in at least 2 places. and you need to figure out, you need to build your deck so that it's good in 2 places. I'm gonna go ahead and lower the floor here. This card is not good in all places. It's good in 2 places. It's good when you have creatures you can sacrifice that you want to sacrifice, and you don't need to sacrifice anything crazy. If you draw 3 cards, gain 3 life, that's fantastic. But you have to have a deck that can do that. And we'll look at the kind of card we want to sacrifice in just a minute. But you also have to be very heavy green for this card, and it's not free. Yeah, like this is an extreme late game card and an early game card, and you need to be good in one of those modes. So I gave it the floor of a 4, which is the lowest rating I give any of the MDFCs. But it's still fine because it's an MDFC and you're okay playing lands. I'll replace it with other MDFCs though. Also, Highline. All right, so here's a really good card that makes this card a lot better. This is a 3 mana 3/3 that makes a Scion on cast. It makes a Scion on death. There are like, this is a 3 mana 3/4 that you get like 3/4 with the power. But that spawn is good. It blocks 2 creatures. This is one of the most efficient 3 drops. And it's good with emerge cards. It's good with all of your sack outlets. I'll splash it. Aristocrats deck, and if I'll splat, like as a litmus test, if you'll splash a card in an Eldrazi, like in an Aristocrats deck, a black-white Aristocrats deck, then it becomes a means for you to play an Aristocrats style deck without the white color. So you can play the Eldrazi Repurposer in a black deck with enough cards that care about your creatures dying. It has a good thing to do in every deck. So like, if you're the Eldrazi deck, this is your ramp creature. If you're red-green Eldrazi, then it makes 2 Scions. If you're green-black, you care about having creatures to sacrifice, although it's not itself modified. And if you're, it's a little weaker in the green-white. I'm gonna go ahead and lower the floor because it's pretty weak in green-white specifically. Like, you want to go wide, but that's 2 different creatures you have to modify. Yeah, it's just fine in the modified deck. I lowered the floor, but I like that ceiling of a 7 if you are like, if you have some Aristocrats modes and if you have some Eldrazi, like if this is doing more than one thing for you, it's very good. Evolution Witness. I think I need to lower this one. So the thing is, this is a 3 mana 2/1 or a 5 mana 4/3 that returns a permanent from your graveyard to your hand. Stat wise, it's a little weak. But as a late, this is, if you look at this as a 5-drop or as a really late game card, this is a strong one. It generates a lot of cards for you, and there's so many different engines with it. Like if you can get a Nesting Grounds with this, if you can use that black removal spell to put a counter on it, it works. It doesn't have to adapt to return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. It just has to have a counter put on it, which means that like if you have the white creature, you have the white creature that proliferates. Well, every time you play a creature, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. And then play that creature. And then return that from your graveyard to your hand. If you have the black spell, that puts a counter on it. That's another piece of value. If you have the Nesting Grounds to pull a counter off and put a counter on it, that's a piece of value. If you have the green-black creature that every time it attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on target modified creature, that's another piece of value. And it's so difficult to disrupt once it gets going. Yes. This generates so much value. So I gave it a floor of 3, but the ceiling's a 7, and it should usually play somewhere in the middle. Like the 5s, if you're paying a 5 mana for a 4/3 that picks up a card, you have to think about how you're playing with this. Your opponent gets to interact with it. But compared to the other understated cards, like we've looked at a lot of cards where just being behind on curve makes that card a lot worse. That's not the case here. This card, the ceiling is so high. But I think it also has diminishing returns, even though they can get each other back. So if you have 2 copies, you can block and then play the next one and adapt. There's a lot of chains you can build out of this, but keep an eye on that floor and make sure you're doing something with it. Not a free piece of value. All right, up next, Fangs of Colonia. It's hard to get the full value out of this card. So 2 mana to put 2 counters on a creature, that's bad, that's unplayable. 2 mana to put 3 counters on a creature, meaning that it already has 1 counter on it, that's okay. It's still not something I'd be happy to play in this set, especially on a high risk sorcery. For this card to be good, you need for it to both have the potential to make a creature gigantic, like to win the game off of 1 creature, for surprise. It's not that, like, we're going through the cases, Ganj. So if you are putting one counter on a creature and then doubling it, that's 2 counters, that's bad. If you are putting one counter on a creature that has a counter on it, that's putting 3 counters on it, that's bad. If you are putting one counter on a creature, doubling the counter on it, and it already has 3 counters on it, then you get to put you put one counter and then double. That's 5 counters for 2 mana. That is still not great. I don't know that it does trigger twice. Does this trigger twice? The thing is, there's only 2 cards that benefit from that. The first one is this of Evolution Witness. The second one is the draw 2, but like, this is not worth a whole card most of the time because you have to, like, it's also high risk. If you're paying 2 mana to put 5 counters on a creature, you're going all in on that creature. It's like putting an aura on it. And it's really tough to have a creature where that benefits from that, which also is low risk, which your opponent's not going to just spend a removal spell to kill. So for this card to be playable, you have to both have a creature that gets large all at once and the potential for overload to win you the game. You need both cards. Like, you need both have, for this to be worth a slot in your deck, you need to both be able to double one creature's power as a combo finish and for the overload to be relevant. The overload only has to put 2 counters on everything for it to be relevant. But like, you need to build a deck that both has the creatures that benefit from having their counters doubled and can go wide with the overload. Which is not impossible to build, but is a reason not to take this early. There are rares that make it work, and there are uncommons that make it work. You need both of those things, and you need them first. So I gave it a 2 with a floor of 2 and a ceiling of 6, and it's high effort. There are some hydras that make it work. The modular bird, so that's a good example. So there is a green-black counters deck. If you have the modular bird, and then a bunch of other go wide cards, that works. But if you have the modular bird, don't you want to fill your deck up with as many artifacts as possible? And there aren't other artifacts that care a lot about the counters. There is some rare ones, and there's one other uncommon besides the modular bird. But like, that's work. That's not a reason to pick Fangs of Colonia. If you have the modular bird and 2 Terramanders and are a black-green modified deck, go ahead and pick up the Fangs. You're never going to pick one, the Fangs of Colonia, because you need to already have those cards for this card to be good. Alright, up next, Foul Strike. 2 mana kill a creature with flying is not terrible in this set. There's a lot of good flyers. Well, that's not true. All the flyers are good. So destroy target creature with flying is solid, but the reinforced 2 is great if you have, for instance, an Evolution Witness. So you need both of those things to be true. This is good when you have the adapt creatures that want the counters. Then you can play it. You don't have those. If you don't have creatures that want the counters actively, don't bother with it. You have access to better removal, but it's in the being removal or a combat trick is good. All right, up next, Gift of the Viper. This one I came back to a few times. It's so much for 1 mana. It's 1 mana for a counter, a reach counter, and a death touch counter, and you untap it. Like, this kills an attacking creature more often than not. It snipes flyers out of the air. It can win you combats. It's a 1-card combo with Nesting Ground. So if you have Nesting Grounds, you get to play this and then give this creature reach and this creature death touch. I think it has diminishing returns. You can't have too many copies of it, but I think this is one of the better combat tricks in this set and that we've seen. There's just so many cards that really get a lot out of a death touch counter. Like, there's a few creatures that ping or that deal a little bit of damage, and the death touch counter is really good with them. I am giving this one a revisit, but I think I'll be pretty happy to play like 3 copies of it. Next, Horrific Assault. 1 mana, bite a creature. 1 mana, kill a creature is fantastic in this form. This card isn't free. You need some large creatures. If you can gain 3 life, it's even better. But like, all you care about is that this is 1 mana, destroy a creature. You need to build a deck where that's the case. When 1 mana destroy a creature in this set is better than it is in other sets, because of how much card advantage you have. Yeah, it's cool. So this, I like that this art exists. It's very much like, it's a little different from the other arts. There's usually in Magic, cards tend to have a very like defined art style that's consistent, but since we have so many different planes and things happening, you get all these different arts, and it's very cool. Oh, cool. It is horrific. Like, that is a scary looking Eldrazi wolf. Yeah, I gave it a ceiling of 7. That's in the Eldrazi deck. Everywhere else, it's a 6 because it's 1 mana destroy target creature. You need creatures to bite with it, but it's not hard to have creatures to bite with it. Hydro Trainer. I'm gonna lower this to a 3. All right, so this is a 2 mana 1/1. Like, you don't want this to be 5 mana for a 3/3, even though you can pump something. You don't want this to be 2 mana for a 1/1. It's tough to make it work. There are Hydras that make it work. Like, this is good with Hydras. There are good Hydras to pair with a Hydro Trainer. There are also good Hydras to bestow upon the Hydro Trainer, but it's not good by itself. So don't fall into the trap of it. Lion Umbra. This is not a free spell. Like, 2 mana +3/+3 Vigilance Umbra Armor is very good. But you can only attach it to a modified creature, so you need a lot of modified creatures in your deck. If you have them, go ahead and snap it up. Like, it's a lower risk aura, and Vigilance and Reach is like a wall. You get a wall when you play this. The Umbra Armor for protection is nice. It is not, your opponent can use a removal spell to shrink your creature. So you have to be careful with how you play it. Like, if I have a 2/2 with a +1/+1 counter because it's 3, so it's a 3/3, and then Lion Umbra, it's a 6/6, and I'm blocking my opponent's 5/5, they can use the destroy target creature spell to take out the Lion Umbra. It's not a strict 2-for-1, but it's just worth knowing about. Yeah, cool card. It's like Daybreak Coronet without the lifelink. I gave it a high ceiling, low floor, so it's usually going to play at a 4, and I'm not going to pick it early too often. Malevolent Rumble, this one I went around a lot. So this card self-enables. So, like, let's say you are a deck that wants to be red-green Eldrazi spawns. Being able to dig for a Writhing Chrysalis with the card that makes an Eldrazi spawn to let you play it on turn 3 is very powerful. And the rest go into your graveyard. So this is good for graveyard effects. This is good in the Eldrazi deck. This is good in the tokens deck. It kind of has diminishing returns in that the more you have, the less likely you are to put relevant cards in your graveyard. But most green decks want to mill themselves a little bit. Most green decks want an Eldrazi spawn. That makes this card pretty good. There's also, like, so many synergies that you want to actively dig for and try to assemble that you're usually pretty happy to play. Alright, Monstrous Vortex. This card does not work at uncommon. It works at rare, and it works with most rares. So if you are a green deck splashing a few colors, you can take this kind of early. But, like, there's only 10 uncommons that this works with, and there's only 2 commons that this works. And the uncommons you can run are in different colors, so they tend to be to clash. But just the way this set is designed, this very, like, the 5 mana 3/3 that makes the cards are so complex and do so many crazy things that you don't have a lot of 4 mana 5 power creatures. You don't have a lot of 5 mana 5 power creatures. You don't have a lot, like, your 5 mana creatures are not likely to have 5 power. If you have the creatures first, you can start picking the Monstrous Vortexes, but it's tough because you want, like, 5 hits for this card to be good. And it's especially tough at 5 mana. Like, you can play this on turn 4. If you're taking turn 4 off, you need to have 2 5 mana creatures on, like, you need to have 2 bodies on turn 5 to make up for that tempo loss. So if you have the 5 mana 5+ power creatures, this card becomes good. They're all rares, and if you have them, great. But this is a true build around. You need to build around this card, and you need the rares first, and then you can make it work. Nightshade Dryad. You just always want to play this in green. Like, a mana dork that fixes your mana. It's better than adding 1 mana of any color because it even makes waste, and it has Death Touch. This is a mana dork that will always trade with the card. There's only a few exceptions. There's 1 creature with First Strike. For the most part, this will trade with a creature after it ramps your mana. Very powerful. That's not supposed to be there. It's almost always going to play near that ceiling of a 5, and it's really good in green. It's one premier green card. Giving Death Touch to Mandark is wild. All right, Nyxborn Hydra. Same as the mask, you want a way to generate trample. What you'll find a lot in these Hydra style cards is green X is always fine. Like if you play it on turn 5, it's a 5 mana 4/5 reach trample. That's fine. If you play it turn 3, it's a 3 mana 2/3 reach trample. I mean, you obviously don't want to play it on turn 3, but that's fine. The nice thing about Nyxborn Hydra is it's not quite an X mana XX. It is a double X. You can play green 2, bestow it onto a creature. That creature gets +2/+2, and then it becomes a 2/3 when it dies. So bestow does make the difference for this X spell. It's a good X spell. I'll usually play it in my green decks. I don't want all of them, but so many creatures get value from having bestow or having a little more power or having counters. It kind of always does what you want, and it is that trample finisher that I keep saying that you need in green. It's like a Dread Mask. You get to put it on your biggest creature to get through for lethal, and it has, in addition to that, lots of little combos like Aura and equipment spells you cast cost X less to cast. Well, that applies to the bestow cost on the Hydra, so it's only green 1 to put 2 counters on. It's low risk. If your opponent kills the card that you bestow onto, it's a little bit better, but it's really good. This is, I think, currently my biggest grading difference with other content creators. I usually check after I give all my ratings. This is up there for, like, this is one of my biggest grading differences. This is one of my biggest grading differences. And most of the rest are in line. Like, this one is fairly different. I have it a lot lower than other people. But yeah, this is one of my biggest grading differences with other content creators. I think this card is very good in green. The reason the floor isn't higher is that this is a bad early play. And it competes with other things for early plays. Like, but you're right, it really is low risk because, like, no, because in this set, I am not happy to play a 4 mana 3/4. Like, I want this to be a 5 mana 4/5 or more. You might be right though, Thane. Like, it's hard to punish the counters. Like, counters are almost always good for you. It is itself a modified creature. It lets you bring the... Yeah, we're raising the floor. Okay. Thank you. Alright, up next, Path of Annihilation. So this is a much lower risk build around. So it is similar to this Monstrous Vortex, but the floor of it is a lot higher. So this is a 4 mana enchantment. Just to break it down, let's say you have no Eldrazi spawn in your deck. This is the only way you have to make it. This is 4 mana to make 2 Manadors that both also sack for mana. This puts you to 9 mana on turn 5. This bottom line of text is nice, but it really isn't necessary to how this card works. It also doesn't apply to just Eldrazi spawns. So, like, this card is really good in an Eldrazi deck. Like, if you just have Basking Broodscale, then now your Basking Broodscale makes mana too. And Eldrazi themselves have a lot of good mana sinks. I think pack one, pick one. This is a good card, and you can... It doesn't have to be in an Eldrazi deck. It's best in an Eldrazi deck. It will play okay in other decks, but it ramps you to non-Eldrazi things too. Because they tap for 1 mana of any color. It doesn't stack well. You can't play, like, getting 3 of these cards doesn't do a lot for you. Yes, making the 2 spawns is nice, but that's not worth 4 mana. What you care about is this middle line of text. Eldrazi you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. This bottom line of text is nice. This top line of text is nice. I'll usually pick the first one pretty high, and I'm not going to worry so much about additional copies until after I have my big creature. So this is a powerful card in the Eldrazi deck, whose value to you personally will adjust a lot over the course of your draft. Up next, Priest of Titania. So there's only 5 elves in the format. One of them is a mythic rare. One of them is black, and one of them is good. This is not the one that is good. This is the one that is good. There's just not enough elves. It is still a mana dork. It is usually going to put you to 4 mana on turn 3. This is the worst way to do that. If you build a deck without 3 drops, then you might need this priest to round things out. Like, you'll have games where you'll have drafts where you have a ton of 4 drops and you were really counting on the Nightshade Dryads and Malevolent Rumbles to make that work, and you just don't see them. So you can take the priest, but you just are not having you're not going to make this card work for you. Yeah, it's a really good elves card. It almost makes elves good in modern. I think elves is a really good modern deck right now, because we get one other card, but there are not enough elves in this set for this card to be good. Also, hi Fina. All right, up next, Propagator Drone. This thing is a monster. So this evolves the Eldrazi spawn when it comes into play. Like, you get to play this and it evolves all your Eldrazi spawn. It makes all your Eldrazi spawn 1/2s by itself. Then every creature you control grows your board. If this didn't have either line of text, I'd still play it. Like, 4 mana make an Eldrazi is good on a 2/2, 2 mana 2/2, and creature tokens you have evolve is good on a 2 mana 2/2. Card is very powerful. Fury is banned, Fina. Fury is gone. There's no more Fury. I know. Yes, it does beat Fury. Yes, but elves, like, I quit modern when they printed Fury because my decks were slivers, elves, goblins, merfolk, 8 bears, and early Yogg, and none of those decks could beat a Fury. So I'm like, well, we're just not gonna play modern, I guess. Yep, I stopped playing modern when Fury was printed, and I came back when Fury was banned. I won the first big tournament after Fury was banned. Yeah, so I gave it a ceiling of 7. That's in the Eldrazi deck. A 4 or 5. That's everywhere else. It's just a really good card, Propagator Drone. I think this is my highest rated green card. No, the land. All right, I have 2 other cards the same rating. So this card is better even than it looks. You've watched me first pick Clear Shot in OTJ. This card is just better than Clear Shot. It is lower risk than Clear Shot. You can make it. Yes. So you're very likely to get a 2-for-1 out of this. So compare. This is 3 mana, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. But then it's not that creature that deals damage to another creature. It's all modified creatures. So the downside of Clear Shot was that you usually had to play it on your biggest creature, because then your biggest creature would get the +1/+1 and ensure that the other biggest creature that your opponent had died. This one, you can play it on whatever creature you want, whichever creature is in combat at the time, and then one of your opponent's creatures just dies if you have other modified creatures. This is a very powerful instant speed spell. It is a combat trick and a removal spell, and you're going to be happy to play it in all of your green decks. I will often splash this card if I have a few large creatures or a few modified creatures. Up next, the Oozewag. Again, another great way to give your creatures trample to close that game. A 4 mana 4/4 is a really efficient body in this, and it's a 4 mana 4/4. Like, a 4 mana 4/4 is a big enough threat on its own that you don't have to adapt it right away. You can just attack. Your opponent can't block this with a 5/5 or a 4/4 because you'll adapt. It's just a really efficient body. You don't want this in the Eldrazi deck. The Eldrazi deck has other good. Maybe that means I should lower the. I'm gonna drop the floor a little bit. Yeah, so you don't want this in the Eldrazi deck, but you're happy to play it in green black, green white, or green blue. You're not happy to play it in either Eldrazi. Well, but you will. You'll play it because you're not always going to have pure Eldrazi. So, like, it's a good enough body in those decks that I'm still happy to play it. Territory Caller. 5 mana 7/5 reach. You don't need other text for this card to be good, but it is. There is other text. So what you can do with the Territory Caller is the Eldrazi deck already once. It doesn't even have to be the Eldrazi deck. If you have a pile of fetch lands, you might be holding them, and then you play the Caller, then you sack all your fetch lands and draw a few cards. Like, this is a 5 mana 7/5 that draws half a card on average, because usually about half your deck is creatures at that stage of the game because you're fetching. You get to pull a land out of your deck, makes it more likely you hit a creature. And the fail case of Surveil is great. Like, either you draw a creature card or you Surveil one, and that means that you are more likely to hit more creatures after this card comes down. I'll splash this card. I will run it in every green deck, including the Eldrazi deck. It's just really efficient and strong. Up next, the Hunger Tide Rises. So, there are enough good, very cheap creatures in this set at Rare and Mythic that this bottom line of text is relevant. You sacrifice one, like, if you're sacrificing more than one creature, it's bad. You don't want to do that. You want to sacrifice one creature to go get a Grist out of your deck, or that 1-mana 1/1 Mythic that generates a token every turn, or maybe you can give up 2 creatures for like a Sorin, or maybe you have an extra creature that your opponent is running Dog Gumper for some reason. Generally, it's going to be 3 mana for 1, 2, 3 1/1s over 3 turns. Nothing great, but like there are decks that just want 3 bodies from 1 card. So it's not a great card, but it has a place. I think you can do green-black Aristocrats, but you want to have rares in your deck that this fetches, and to be able to use your 3 1/1s that it generates. Because it's chapter 1, 2, and 3 you make a 1/1 in. It does it 3 times. So you have some time to figure out what you're missing. Alright. Trickster's Elk. I love this card. Right. So, like, I think there's a green-black Aristocrats deck that once the Hunger Tide Rises, and you want to be able to sacrifice 2 creatures to go get an Aristocrat or a Sack Outlet, whatever you're missing. You can also, if you have 2 Marionettes that we just looked in black, Marionette Apprentices. If you have 2 Marionette Apprentices out, you can sack your board. You can just sack all your creatures for the sake of sacrificing them. It's not a useless card, but it's not great either. Alright. Trickster Elk. Trickster's Elk? I just read the flavor text on this for the first time. So this is a reference to Oko, who Rowan and Kenrith are Oko's kids, and Oko turns shit into elks. And I guess, like, this is a 2-sentence story. Like, this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 word story, and that's brilliant and poetic, and I love that. Are Rowan and Will Kenrith not Oko's kids? Or no, Oko turned their dad into an elk. That's right. Okay, so a 3/3/3 elk, that's just okay, but lots of the green and white cards want you to bestow, and those decks also run living weapons, which means they run germs, and being able to turn your own germs into a 3/3, your opponent's biggest creatures into a 3/3, that all death rattle, that all die into giving you a 3/3 back is pretty good. So, like, if you have a turn 1, like, it's a really strong curve to go turn 1 Mandibular Kite, turn 2 bestow a Trickster's Elk onto it, attack for 4 in the air, and then when they deal with the 4/4 flyer, you get a 3/3 that you can then put the kite on and still have a 4/4 flyer. So it's good in green-white, but it's also pretty good in other colors. Like, if you have to turn your opponent's creature into an elk, it's not ideal, but it's better than them having their creature. Right. If their thing dies, you get it back. If your thing dies, you get it back. That makes this card pretty good. You need to build about it into a little, but it just will happen. Like, you'll be able to grow your own creatures often enough that, like, if this is bestow +2/+2, it's okay. But the flexibility on it is great. Being able to turn your opponent's creatures off or your own creatures on is really nice. And every color pair has creatures whose abilities you need to deal with. A 3/3 is not nothing, though. Like, turning your opponent's Eldrazi into a 3/3 is annoying to them, but they still have a 3/3. Alright, cool card, though. Really, this is This is really elegant design. It's like, I find this card really beautiful. All right, up next we've got Warped Tusker. This card does not do what you want it to do. 3 mana, make a spawn, draw a card is fine. 7 mana for a 6/9 is fine. It makes a spawn. Neither of these are good modes. Like, there are better versions of every combination of effects that this card can have. That being said, sometimes you'll have to pick your ramp early and you'll get these Warped Tuskers late. Sometimes you'll have to, sometimes you need to have a critical mass of 7 mana creatures in your deck, and them being able to cycle makes them a lot better. But like, you don't want to use your ramp to jump from 3 to 5. This card is average compared to all the other things you can do, but it's a role player. Like, if you don't have enough big creatures, grab it. If you don't have enough ramp, grab it. There's just usually, hopefully, going to be better versions of all of these. Yes, exactly. Like, sometimes you just need a critical mass of 7 mana creatures. Sometimes you need a critical mass of drawing one additional card. But ultimately, this is going to be the worst version of those effects. So the flexibility is nice, but ideally, instead of having one card that does both things poorly, you have 2 cards that do each thing well. Symbiote, same problem as Priests. There's not enough elves. It has the downside of it also itself not being an elf. It does have... It does combo with Evolution Witness. Because you can play the Evolution Witness, pick something up, adapt it, and then return it to your hand with the Symbiote. That's the worst form of the Wirewood Symbiote. That's the worst form of that engine, of the Witness engine. There's a lot of good Witness engines that don't involve the Symbiote, but you'll be able to pick up the Symbiote late if you have a lot of Witnesses. There are still only 5 elves in the set. None of them have an ETB. But there is one with the adapt. Wumpus Aberration, really cool card. All right, so on cast, if you didn't put waste into the cost, they put a creature card from your hand on the battlefield. Putting waste into the cost is pretty trivial, making this mostly a 4 mana 6/6. However, it is a 4 mana 6/6 that you cannot discover and you cannot cascade into, and that's relevant in green. Like, this is a 4 mana 6/6 that you really don't want to have in the same deck as your Monstrous Vortex, and you really don't want to have in the same deck as your Annoyed Altasaur. So, like, cool design. You play it when you can play wastes. 4 mana 6/6 trample. That's pretty good. But it excludes some of the cards that you get to play. Not that many, but it just kind of works. It almost feels like they intentionally just didn't want it to work with the Cascade and Discover cards. So that is all for the green cards. We're gonna do one more card because I forgot to put it in with the multicolored stuff. This should have been in with the multicolored stuff, but I missed it. Wastecape Battle Mage. This is a cool card. This is a bad card if it's 2 mana for a 2/2. It's a great card if it's 2 mana to exile target artifact, or if it's 3 mana to exile an artifact or enchantment opponent controls. Reclamation Sage is good in this format. I would be very happy to play this. And the fail case of not having green mana or not having a target is you get to bounce a creature. And like, all the modes are good except for, so 2 mana 2/2 is the only bad mode. 3 mana 2/2 exile, 3 mana 2/2 disenchant is great. 4 mana 2/2 bounce a creature is great. 5 mana exile an enchantment, bounce a creature is amazing. It's really good in this format. There's not a ton of bounce, but there are a ton of strong tokens. So being able to bounce a token and take out a pesky card is really good. Yes. So I gave it a 6 with a ceiling of 6. It's usually going to play at that 6. You can play this in green. Like, this is 3 colors, right? You can play it in green wastes. You can play it in blue wastes. Ideally, you want to play it in both. But if you're just treating it as a Simic card, it should always play near that ceiling of a 6. What time is it? 9:11. All right, so that is gonna do it for the full set review of all the commons and uncommons in the set. I don't know if I'm going to do the rares. I might do the rares, but the next step is my advanced draft primer. So keep an eye out for that. You can find it on thegathering.gg. That's the website I write for. So yeah, I'm in charge of all the limited content here. We do, so this is going to change this week, either Monday or Tuesday, but usually I keep the spreadsheet updated. There's all the instructions, and I give every card a rating. Best way to make it so that you can. There we go. All right, so I give every card a rating, and I do mark the change log as well, but you'll have to see the document for that. However, we also link the document here, and you can see the changes that I make every week, how much I think something has changed, and you can always ask me like, well, why did your ankle biter come up? Well, ankle biter came up for this reason. And so I track it. So I don't assume that I know everything from the beginning, but I know everything by the end. Hey, Taxu, good to see you. And we learn a lot as we go. This is not strictly data because 17 lands data is awesome, but it doesn't account for the things around it and for how you drafted those cards when you picked them. So I will have the primer up this week. We will have the draft tier list up this week. And if you're interested in other formats, we do have like Standard, Pioneer. We do data-driven tier lists for every format. Weekly if they're played, monthly if it's out of season. Go ahead and check it out. It's a great website. We do pretty well.